When I looked at the title of this session, and after some instruction from the organizers, I understood that there is one word missing from the title, and I think that it would be interesting for how long we will sustain our discussion within this R word. That's why I am asking the participants to concentrate on propaganda in their countries, as we all are to this or that extent subjects of the propaganda that we receive from the neighboring country, yes, and probably we do not need as much knowledge about this and as much foreign perspective about it as you, I have no doubt, may provide. But as we have only 50 minutes, no questions from me so far, just I would ask every one of you to speak for 5 minutes about what you want to really tell those people who are all ears. Who's starting? Iván?
Yeah, sure.
Iván Yakovina, okay.
Yeah, I can start. The most important part of this propaganda war which we are witnessing now is this half-lies, half-truth. It became the main weapon of Russian propaganda and many other propagandas in different parts of the world. As we all see now, in many, many countries, very dark forces are trying to reach power. For example, just recently in Austria, a political party, Freedom Party, which was kind of semi-fascist party, almost gained the presidency of Austria. It could be a disaster, because usually people don't follow Austrian presidential elections. In Austria, president is just like an English queen. He has no real powers. But in this case, the whole world was following Austrian elections because this very dark, very xenophobic, very anti-Islamophobic party was trying to get to the presidency. And they almost succeeded. There was 0.4% difference between the Green candidate, the candidate from the Green Party, and from this Freedom Party, like almost fascist party candidate. So the Western European country was very, very close to get a fascist, like let's name it, a fascist president. It is very dangerous. The same tendencies we can see now in many countries of Europe, in Denmark, in Finland, in France, even in Germany, in the country with a very, very dark past of Nazism. These dark forces are trying to get power, like this Alternative für Deutschland, this anti-immigrant party, and another very extremist group, Pegida. They're all trying to get to the power, and they're all using, all of these parties, they're using pretty much the same propaganda methods, which are saying, like, they say, yes, we might be not as good as you might think, but the others, so-called mainstream politicians, they're even worse. They're always saying you lies. They're lying always, and they're using these dark, bad parties. They're using these propaganda methods of saying half-lies, half-truths all the time. And actually, I don't really see how can we fight this method of propaganda, which is going all around the world. By the way, in the United States, Donald Trump is using the same method. He's blaming everybody that you are all liars. He's blaming the media, that media is lying all the time. So we are in a very bad position as media as a whole, because we, this usual, business as usual, when we have to give free speech to both parties, is hitting back, because now people, they lost all the like orientation in the media world. They don't know what is good, what is bad. And these dark forces all around the world, they are using this situation, unfortunately. This is the biggest problem which I see now.
Thank you, Ivan. I only want to add that when we speak about giving word to two parties, we tend to forget about the third party and fourth party and
That's right.
fifth party and so on. As you mentioned the United States here, it is logical that the next person to speak will be the ambassador of the US, Jeffrey Пайєтт, and how prone you are to the Ukrainian propaganda, Mr. Ambassador?
Thank you, Andrei. Let me say, first of all, thank you for having me here. It's great to be back at the Lviv Media Forum. It's not so great to be speaking after Slava, because none of us can keep up with him. But let me say, this is, for me, the first event of America Days in Lviv. I'm especially happy that we've got America Days in Lviv happening at the same time as my friend and colleague Jan Tominski is here for Europe Days. It is a good reflection of both the very strong partnership that Jan and I have and the commitment of the United States and Europe to stand together working with Ukraine, but also a wonderful symbol of the importance of Lviv as a cosmopolitan city, as a crossroads, and as a city that is setting the pace for building a modern, democratic European Ukraine. On propaganda, I'll say a couple of things. First and most important, that the Ukraine's best weapon for fighting propaganda is the truth. It is a huge mistake for Ukraine to be drawn into the game of trying to replicate what Russia has done using information as a fungible, as a flexible commodity. And so from that perspective, the main point I would like to leave with you is the idea that there are smart ways to fight propaganda and dumb ways to fight propaganda. Ukraine has a fabulous record since the Revolution of Dignity in building space for media. A special shout out to Ramatsky, the fact that you guys now have your broadcast license, very, very exciting development in building a media which is free of the control of oligarchic business groups. But there are so many other good stories that repeat themselves across this country. And what that media needs to do is tell the truth, because that's your strongest weapon. The truth, as Slava just described, that Ukraine is a country which is building a state, building a national narrative, and that we all have to be understanding that that takes time. Explaining the truth that Ukraine has been fighting a war of aggression. The wonderful example of Nadia Savchenko, who was kidnapped from Ukrainian soil, and this crazy upside down land that comes out of the Russian government, Russian foreign ministry, the Kremlin. Get out there, tell your story, tell it in Europe, tell it in the United States, but don't succumb to the temptation of doing the same things that your enemies are doing out of troll factories in St. Petersburg. One of the things that I've learned the hard way over 3 years is that the informational warfare that Russia has engaged in is not designed to get at the truth. This is not like a university debate where you're trying to find what is the ultimate truth. Russia has used information as a weapon. It's used propaganda to confuse, to distract. The whole story of the fascists and all of these other things that we saw starting in 2014. Don't fall into the trap of playing that same game. I put up on my Twitter yesterday a couple of stories, both a video file and a story written by Julian Barnes from the Wall Street Journal about Army FM. And the work that an American volunteer organization called Spirit of America has done to work with the Army to broadcast out in the East, out in the ATO region. And I didn't see who asked the question from Donbass, but let me just say, for me, for the US government, you can't have spent as much time as I have traveling around eastern Ukraine and have any doubt that Donbass is Ukraine. I mean, go to Mariupol. I was talking to Slava about that last night. 10% of the population of that city showed up for the Okean Elzy concert a few weeks ago. But use the tools of the state to reach out I'm very glad that the U.S. government, through the State Department, through the Broadcasting Board of Governors, has done some of the same kind of stuff that Spirit of America has done to help provide radio transmitters, mobile amplifiers, tools to help the government get its story out to the people of Donbass, and to provide what President Poroshenko once called an antidote to this injection of propaganda that has been pumped out into eastern Ukraine. But there's something not to do also, and this is what I want to finish up with. There's this whole debate in Kyiv right now over the leak of private data from international journalists. And this NGO, or whoever it is, Meritorowicz. That's stupid. I mean, that's the diplomatic phrase isn't really there to describe how damaging it is to alienate the professional journalists who have been working in eastern Ukraine, sometimes at considerable personal risk. There's Simon Ostrowski from Vice News was kidnapped and held in a Russian separatist dungeon. A CBS correspondent was kidnapped and held against her will. These are professional journalists just like all of you. And whoever it is in the NGO community or the parts of the government who believe that it's useful to publicize that kind of personal data in a way that jeopardizes the safety of those professionals simply doesn't understand Ukraine's interest in ensuring that Western journalists are able to continue doing their jobs. And that includes traveling to Donbass, documenting the dungeons, documenting the torture, documenting the economic deprivation, all of which is a direct result of a Russian war of aggression. And I know Yerema Duk is probably here somewhere. I know Yerema has made public statements on this issue on behalf of Bankova. I know that your terrific new Deputy Prime Minister, Ivanka Klumpush, has also talked about the importance of clarifying this issue. I hope that Minister Avakov, I hope that the government will come out with the same kind of clear declaration condemning people who are jeopardizing professional journalists. So let me finish up there, and again, just to underline that I really do think Ukraine is making progress. I was just saying to my colleague, David Hirsenhorn, who did terrific work here for the New York Times, he's back after a couple of months. This is a country which is moving forward, and the world understands that, but you need the international media to help you tell that story, because you can't prevail alone. You need support from the United States, you need support from Europe, and that support is only going to be there if Ukraine continues to tell its story, continues to explain how, as Slava said, you are building your state. Thank you. Dr.
Thank you very much. Being a diplomat, I presume Mr. Ambassador could not but mention the government story, but could not comment on some parts of the government story, whereas many journalists in Ukraine are not fully satisfied with the contents of the government story, with how this is delivered, and with the final aim, which sometimes is not disclosed. But this I leave to probably questions from the audience. By the way, I remind you that there's this Slido, the marvelous system where you can post your questions, and then we'll see which one of them gets the most support from the audience. I would like to ask to speak Rууд Meyyi now from Governance and Integrity in the Netherlands. And recently we've been witnesses, although in a remote way, of a real propaganda war or battle on the grounds of the Netherlands connected to Ukraine, the referendum and all this kind of stuff. What lessons have you drawn for yourself? What lessons can you offer us? If you can squeeze it into 6 minutes, we'll be most grateful.
Okay, so first of all, thank you for having me here. So I could really imagine that after the referendum, you have some reason to say, but the Dutch, not today, please. So could be. So the Dutch referendum, you know a lot about it. I'm certain about that. But there are a few things I want to comment on. I think they are important for us, not only for the Dutch, but also for in what shape we, as Europe and as Ukraine, we are now. And there's something we can learn about is what happened in the Netherlands on the 6th of April, before the 6th of April, to look about what happened and how to counter, how to think about, how to create an alternative to escape from, let's say, the trap we are in on the 6th of April. So, if I put it very succinctly, so, and my neighbor already referred to this, what basically was happening in the Netherlands was, in a certain sense, a success of democracy, so you could say. So we had a right-wing civil society organization who collected 400,000 signatures and asked to organize a referendum about the association agreement. Well, you could say that's quite an achievement from them. And they are the spokes organization, you could say, of a kind of narrative, what is very powerful now in Europe, that you could say that is a negative, nihilistic narrative of fear of what's happening in Europe is happening in the Netherlands, and then we are talking about a lot of things. You can think about a refugee crisis, or you could think about uncertainty created by being part of the European Union and so on. So this is, let's say, what happened. And if you think about propaganda in the Netherlands, of course, you have first of all to think about propaganda in one of the most advanced democracies of the world. That's what we are. You have to think about propaganda in one of the richest countries of the world, one of the wealthiest countries of the world, one of the happiest countries of the world, and one of the freest countries of the world. So this is a kind of a miraculous thing that we have a referendum in the Netherlands on the association agreement in Ukraine in this whole frame nihilistic and framework of fear. So we had, in a sense, all the reason to say, of course, very good, you as Ukrainians, you get rid of your former president Yanukovych, you offered your life for the association agreement, people died at Maidan for that, so of course we welcome you as our friends in Europe. And instead, it went the other way around. So there are two things I want to stress in this. The first is already stressed by Mr. Ambassador. So when it comes to thinking about propaganda in a democratic society as in the Netherlands, then the answer is not so much propaganda answering with propaganda. That would be not only not effective, but it would also not be a good answer as a Democrat. And in fact, one of the most powerful things what happened in the Netherlands, despite that we lost the referendum, was especially, let's say, the presence of the Ukrainian community in the Netherlands who confronted every distorted narrative about Ukraine and about corruption in Ukraine and about agriculture in Ukraine, everything passed with just simple truth, fact-finding, truth-finding, that kind of thing. So this is one of the first and very obvious answers when it comes to propaganda under democratic circumstances, that it has to do with answering it with truth, with fact-finding, and this tirelessly doing that, breaking censorship if this is again. So this is the one thing. But there is one, let's say, vulnerability in that. And that is that the virtue of a democracy and truth and freedom of speech under democracy makes it also vulnerable. So if you ask my fellow countrymen in the Netherlands, and what they think about propaganda. Nobody is convinced by propaganda in the Netherlands. But one of the things is, and this is the virtue of democracy, that we are, let's say, very vulnerable for doubt. So there is these beautiful stories of, not so beautiful stories, about tobacco companies in the 50s. And of course it was well known then already that smoking creates cancer. And the only thing they did was doing some scientific investigation which sheds doubts on some results of other scientific investigations. And what do you do then as a good critical journalist or scientist? You say something like, okay, we have to investigate this. It could be possible. But so we are just investigating. Truth is not enough. We have to develop something new. And one of the things we did basically was a kind of a digital airlift between Ukraine and between the Netherlands. We called it Tak is Ja. And Tak is Ja was basically based on creating an affirmative, positive story of hope to counter this story of fear. And especially Ukrainians make this possible with Maidan. Maidan was really a challenge and keeps being a challenge for Europe. Because it means something like, we want to be Europeans, and you Europeans, would you let us in? And it means basically that you force us, you challenge us to think about what it has to be to become a European again. So that's basically what the Tak is Ja campaign was about. You made 200, 250, 1 minute movies, posted them on the YouTube, but just the simple emotional questions. We want democracy, we want a decent society, we want a non-corrupt government. You have that already, so would you please help us to get us too? So this was the answer, and he put it in a very small sentence. These kind of stories could help us to overcome this nihilistic narrative of fear in a positive narrative of hope, because it helps us to avoid the trap of stepping back in a kind of ethnic nationalism and think about what it means to be a European cosmopolitic form of nationalism. And I think we are desperately in need of that kind of stories and initiatives who create this horizontal, I would say, connection between citizens. For instance, this citizens between Netherlands and Ukraine. And this last sentence, you have to look at the site, because there is the most touching national anthem ever performed of the Netherlands on the Tak is Ja site. This is really stunning and beautiful. So this is, I think, the two things. Truth, yes, the only way, no propaganda against propaganda, that is one thing. And the other thing, we have to think about and create with our new social media and with the support of journalism, this new, let's say, affirmative, positive narrative of hope to overcome this active.
Czech Republic or European Service for Foreign Affairs?
It's European External Action Service, so you can imagine something like Ministry of Foreign Affairs for the European Union. That's the body I work for. First, let me thank you for the invitation, because our team, the East Stratcom, was established to fight Russian disinformation campaign, and it is Ukraine that has the most experience in this regard, how to fight the Russian disinformation, or actually how to fight Russian activities in general. So it is great to be here, because this is really the country where we should learn how to do our job. I think Rууд and Iván actually described the problems we face in particular countries, but to give it a EU perspective, I'm afraid that the biggest problem we face is the disbalance between these activities on one side and the very low level of awareness on the other side. It is something that you probably don't realize here in Ukraine, because if you ask here about Russian propaganda, everybody knows about it and everybody has seen it. This is unfortunately not the case in the countries west of your border. It is the Russian disinformation campaign is still unrealized or unrecognized by vast majority of audiences in the whole European Union. And because of this low level of awareness, it is quite hard actually to challenge it appropriately, because if you don't realize you have a problem, you don't realize you need to solve a problem. So I think the first task of our team, speaking of this particular aim of countering Russian disinformation, should be actually to raise the level of awareness, to try to get the message out of these conference rooms and out of the books by Edward Lucas or Boris Reichester, and to try to give it to the broader audience, which is quite a tough task to do it from Brussels. But that's why we are actually trying to build a pan-European network, because it seemed to me that all we lack is a pan-European stop fake, a website that will expose the disinformation coming out of pro-Kremlin media on a daily basis, show the amount of it, show the scale of it. And so this is what we are trying to do, to build a network of people who are monitoring and analyzing the propaganda activities in their countries. If there's anyone in this room who would like to help us with this, I'm here for you. So I think that's it for now.
Thank you very much, and I would like Iván to briefly comment on what he's heard from our foreign participants. 3 minutes.
Yeah, look, till recently I was a biggest proponent of not using counter-propaganda against propaganda. But now I kind of realized with all these right-wingers who are going to power and who is reaching power in Europe, and Donald Trump in America, and all the successes of Russian propaganda here, I realized one very important thing. Probably we should use some sort of counter-propaganda. I can explain to you why. The point is, in most cases, the truth is boring. Nobody wants to hear and to listen to boring things. Unfortunately, this is a case. So and propaganda, they make up some super fancy, extremely interesting stories which usually have no connection to reality, but they are interesting. It's like a documentary and, I don't know, Star Wars, right? Star Wars is obviously not a documentary movie, but it's much more interesting. It will gain more audience. So probably we should somehow try to make up a mechanism of countering propaganda with something more interesting, more, I don't know, fancier stuff. Because right now we are losing this war. The truth is losing the war to propaganda. That's unfortunate. I really don't know how exactly should we fight it, but the problem is here. We're just losing. The truth doesn't work anymore.
In a way, Ivan has started to answer the most popular question even before it appeared on the screen. And the question comes from Olena. She is supported by 9 other people. Mr. Ambassador, she writes, said that propaganda is being used as a weapon. But what is the method to counteract effectively when you have to deal with a weapon? What can you use instead of a weapon to beat a weapon?
Thanks. Important question, and let me try to restate what I said earlier. The most effective way for Ukraine to maintain interest and engagement from the West, certainly from the United States, but I would venture also from Europe, is to demonstrate, as Prime Minister Groysman is trying to do every day, that Ukraine continues to make progress in building a modern, democratic European state, attacking corruption, reforming customs, building a new police force, building a new army. I think when I look at what's useful about the Russian narrative is it tells you what they're thinking in the Kremlin. And a lot of what is coming out of the Kremlin these days tries to suggest that Ukraine is a hopelessly corrupt country. It's controlled by oligarchs. Nothing has changed since the revolution. I've been here. I know that that is BS. But we have to do, the United States, our European partners, and everybody in this room have to do the work of explaining that. I've had the opportunity in the past couple of weeks to visit both Rome and Madrid, where I was hosted by my ambassadorial counterparts. And in both places, I met with very senior, very good groups of Italian and Spanish journalists. It was amazing to me how behind the curve, how uninformed their understanding of what is happening here was. They, again, had a 2013 vision of the way Ukraine works. I know how fundamentally this country has changed. Our job, your job, is to explain that to the world.
Before Jakub continues to answer the question that Jeffrey was talking about, I just add to the discourse the question from Daria. What is the image of Ukraine that's being formed by your media in your countries among your compatriots? Why so? Why particularly such an image?
Yeah, this is quite a tough question, actually. I'm not in Czech Republic since September. I was there until last summer, worked actually as a journalist, as most of you. And unfortunately, I don't think the image of Ukraine was very precise. The problem in some of the media is this need for some sort of balance. So if you hear that Ukraine is a normal country, and if you hear that Ukraine is a country full of fascists, you will still have some journalists who will think, well, the truth must be in the middle. I have to be balanced. This is the old 5 minutes Hitler, 5 minute Jews paradox that really doesn't work. But I'm afraid we may be too much focusing on the content of the Russian propaganda, and maybe this is not the biggest problem. Actually, the content is ridiculous. The content tells you that Ukraine is governed by fascists, that Angela Merkel organizes refugee crisis, and she was born out of frozen sperm of Adolf Hitler. It tells you that EU pays concentration camps and turns you all into gays. The content is ridiculous, but it is the form that beats us. The form, this constant repeating, this 100 times per day saying the same message. And unfortunately, we are not consistent enough in countering this message. And I'm afraid we are too lazy to do our homework, to say 100 times a day, no sir, you lie. Ukraine is not full of fascists. Angela Merkel doesn't organize a refugee crisis. And it is precisely for this lack of our will to counter this message why 50% of French population believes that the war in Ukraine was unleashed by Kiev. 50% of France, 1/3 of Germany believes it. So there really is a serious problem. And yeah, we need to be more persistent because the other side is extremely persistent.
Thank you, Jakub. And Rууд, you wrap up the discussion effectively. And there's one additional question to you from Ostap, just in a couple of words. Next year there's an election in the Netherlands. Is there a chance, or rather a risk, as he puts it, of the success of Eurosceptics as in Austria?
Well, wouldn't be surprised. Yes, of course there is. There's of course a risk that Eurosceptics will win in the Netherlands the elections, so to say. And what is repeating itself is again and again and again the same problem. Also, my colleagues here are referring to that. So this has very much to do. There is a sort of empty space in our societies. There's a sort of empty space, and this sort of empty space is the space where, especially our politicians of the middle in the Western, let's say, democracies, but also in the United States, but in my country especially, don't succeed in articulating what we as citizens basically agree on. So basically, we agree on a lot of things: good healthcare and good, a decent relationship with Europe. All these kinds are not, let's say, are not very are debated, but because of our center politicians, social democrats, Christian democrats, and basically the liberals are so being hostages by the left and right wings, so to say, because they fear that they would lose it. They are not in the position to articulate this positive message. And that leaves us as citizens at a loss. So really it is possible that in next year Euroscepticism, like everywhere in Europe, it's not only a Dutch problem, so to say, can win. And unless we succeed in occupying this open space with a more, let's say, promising and hopeful message. So, and I think this is very important to think about, because the resources are there. And the paradox is always, being in Ukraine, I'm coming in now for 10 years, I'm working there for 10 years, and I've been here before Maidan, and of course after Maidan, I'm on Maidan. Ukraine is part of this positive message. What Ukraine actually showed in the last couple of years, that what you achieved was so remarkably miraculous, looking at where you come from and where you go, that Ukraine is actually part of this positive message. And I think if I look at the lasting, let's say, results of our referendum, there was really an airlift of Ukrainians from Ukraine to the Netherlands, not only digital, but also live. Ukrainians, young people, were traveling between Rotterdam and Amsterdam in the train and approaching people directly with questions. So, what are you going to do after referendum? Do you know something about Ukraine? Can I help to explain you? That was really impressive. And although on the 6th of April we lost the referendum, and then we still have to say it was only 30% coming up, so to say. And so this, let's say, civil society push, in which you are so an enormous example in Ukraine, is really the helpful thing to overcome this. There are these narratives of hope, and we only don't succeed enough to articulate them.
Thank you very much. Well, nature does not tolerate void, and where there's no truth, then lies appear and fill in the space which could be occupied by truth, which could be a truth presented in an interesting way, a truth presented in an unexpected way sometimes, not a highfalutin deliberations on who is right and who is wrong, but people's stories. This is what we often lack. Some of the questions posed will remain unanswered because we are really running out of time, but they will be answered by life eventually. And by the way, the question about how to tell the truth to, for instance, people in Donetsk or Luhansk, where there's Russian television but no Ukrainian television. This is about also the void and the emptiness. The presence of the Ukrainian television or Ukrainian media does not per se guarantee that they are quality ones. The question and the issue of quality is very crucial, if there may be such things as very crucial things, just crucial. And the quality is always linked with truth. When there is no truth, there's no quality. Before I thank the participants, I still have a question which I would like Mr. Ambassador to start to explain to me, but maybe other participants will chip in. Could you please, very briefly, explain to me the meaning of the phrase, my country, right or wrong, and whether this can be associated with the phrase, my government, right or wrong?
Important question. The last part is the easiest one to answer. Absolutely not. Those are different concepts. I think one of the most powerful changes that I have witnessed in Ukraine over the 3 years that I have been privileged to work here has been exactly what Slava Vakarchuk was talking about, the emergence of this unified national identity. One of the great things about my job is I get to travel a lot. I probably travel across Ukraine more than most Ukrainians. In the past few weeks, I've been to Kharkiv, to Mariupol, I'm in Lviv, been in Odessa. And the thing that strikes me most in those travels is the sense of a new united national identity that is beginning to emerge. We have a 240-year head start on you in the United States. So we appreciate that this takes time. But just like Ukraine, the United States is a country that was forged in revolution. And a lot of the basic concepts of what our society stands for come from there. I was privileged on Tuesday night to be at Jamala's big concert with President Poroshenko and many others in Kyiv. And I mean, she's a wonderful performer and a fabulous symbol of Ukrainian diversity. And I'm very, very happy for what she achieved at Eurovision. But much more interesting for me than watching the stage was to watch the audience. And all of the young, especially young girls, 10-year-old, 12-year-old girls wearing vyshyvanka, bringing flowers and stuffed animals to the stage, but also learning about Crimean Tatar history. I was watching the audience when Jamala did her numbers, which were sung in Tatar, and the way people were all paying attention, even if they couldn't understand the words. That's how you build a national identity. There's this very famous statue that is at our most important war cemetery in Arlington, Virginia, of Iwo Jima. And it's the Marines raising the American flag. And there have been Hollywood movies about that whole episode because it happened at a time when the war was going very difficultly for the United States. But I remember visiting that statue for the first time as a young boy with my family when we came from California for the first time to visit our capital. Ukraine will do the same thing over time. You will figure out who are your icons. Who are the heroes of the cyborgs of the Donetsk airport? Who are the heroes of the Maidan? Who are the heroes in the Rada, who've written the new laws, who've broken the back of old Ukraine, and who've built a new country? And as I look at this today, what most strikes me is this is a much more united Ukraine than the country that I arrived in 3 years ago. But it's also a country which is much more determined to build the European future that you've tried to achieve for 25 years. This is hard work. You are trying to repair the damage that the Soviet Union inflicted on you, and you are trying to repair the damage that the oligarchic structures that came after the Soviet Union inflicted on this society. But I have absolutely no doubt you're going to win because I see what's happening in Ukrainian civil society, in Ukrainian politics, and in countries across the length and breadth of this country.
Thank you very much. Anyone wants to add something? No? Thank you. Give them a big hand. Джеффрі, Пайєтт, Іван, Яковина, Якуб, Каленський, Rууд, Мейї. Thank you very much.